Going live. Is that what it says? Okay. Good afternoon and welcome everyone. Happy Friday. My name is Dr. Katie Turner and I am the Artistic Director of Turnkey Theater. I'm so glad to have you all with us today. This is our first YouTube live event, so we're very excited to be speaking with you on this platform. We are coming to you via Zoom, and so I understand there's a bit of a delay between what we say and do and what you hear and see, so we'll do our best to work with that. I want to first thank my assistants today, my social media marketing manager, Jade Boltnow, and my artistic associate, KD, who are helping us with the chat today. So before I introduce my panelists, I just want to say what this event is about in case you're not sure. So we're here today to talk about the fascinating and unique form that is immersive theater or immersive performance. It's just an opportunity to talk about what this form is, why we do it, what we love about it, and how sometimes it can be a bit of a pain in the butt because it's a very complicated form. I'm very lucky to be joined by a few folks that have experience creating, studying, performing in, and producing this form. And of course, we also want to hear from all of you in the audience. Before I introduce my panelists, I just want to briefly acknowledge that we are a very white panel today, although we cast our invitation net wide. These are the folks that are available at this time today, and I just want to acknowledge that I know we're not reflecting the diversity of our viewing audience and that it is part of our mission to be an inclusive company. And so we hope as our network grows and our opportunities to have these events grow, that we'll be able to reflect that racial and ethnic diversity more completely. I am, however, excited about our geographical diversity. We have Laura joining us from Canada today and Brian in Ohio. The rest of us are in California. And we have a broad diversity of experience and perspectives from our own studies and professional theatrical work coming to our conversation today. So I'm very excited to see what my panelists have to say. Let me just tell you a little bit about the folks that are in the room. So I'm happy to introduce my colleague, DJ Hopkins, who I've known for several years now. We work together at the School of Theater, Television, and Film at San Diego State University. And
hi,
hi, DJ. DJ's current focus in his research is on immersive theater and virtual reality, including immersive Shakespeare performance. Also joining us is someone I have only met here today in Zoom land. I'm very excited to make your acquaintance. Is Dr. Laura Levin, an associate professor of theater and performance studies and associate dean for research in the School of the Arts, Media, Performance, and Design at York University in Toronto, Canada. She currently serves as a dramaturg for the VR theater production You Should Have Stayed Home, written and performed by Tommy Taylor. Hi, Laura. Thank you for joining us. And then we also have with us Brian. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not looking at my Zoom.
It's okay. It's okay. Took me a second to unmute. Hello.
Excellent. I love Zoom. Okay, thank you. And then, of course, we also have with us Brian Gladden, who is joining us out of Central Ohio. He is a playwright, director, satirist, and producer, and has been part of the area creative community working within and outside the system of theater that exists in his hometown. He currently wears the hat of conceptual artist and producer and is in the second year of producing a community art project and symposium. Last year's theme was monsters, sociological or personal, and how we deal with them. And this year's theme is crossroads, personal, societal, political, and or physical. Brian, thanks so much for being with us this afternoon.
Thank you.
And last but not least, joining us is Amy Dell, who is a San Diego-based actress who really enjoys the unique style of immersive theater and was recently seen in On Her Shoulders We Stand, produced by 2 Yo Theater, which was a 6-room immersive performance about the role of Latina women in World War II. She'll be performing next month in Silent Sky with Lamplighters Theater in San Diego. Other recent roles include Choice with the American History Theater, The History of Joy with Vanguard Culture, and Clue on Stage with the Coronado Playhouse in 413 Rep. When Amy isn't acting, she is an attorney and enjoys playwriting and hiking with her husband and Vermont. Amy, thanks for being with us this afternoon. And just a tiny bit more about me, in addition to being the founding artistic director with Turnkey Theater, I've also worked with Turnkey to produce 4 original productions, which are either interactive or immersive in some way, and have been exploring the concept of devised theater through all of this work. And I'm starting to teach that more as a performing or a teaching artist in my community. And I'm very excited to be opening up more conversations about devised and immersive work in my local as well as the national community as we start to put out more content. So enough about that. I'd love to start off our conversation. Make sure I have my chat box open so that I can see what's anyone's trying to reach me about that. I want to start with the basics. We all hear the word immersive a lot, especially as virtual reality is becoming more and more accessible to many people. The marketing word, it's a theatrical word, it's something that we've all heard and used for years now, and it's just becoming more and more frequent. But I'm curious to know from my panelists, anyone who wants to speak to this, what you think that means. So I'll give us a little bit of a starting point here. I have this excellent book that I love to use. By Jason Warren called Building Worlds, How to Create Immersive Theater. And he says in this book, first of all, that there isn't one definition of immersive theater because there's so many different ways to do it. But generally, what we can call immersive plays with 2 things. First, the role of the audience and how space is used in performance, which leaves a lot of room for a broad definition. He says that, to quote Jason, a production becomes immersive when it is made by a company who will experiment with the theatrical format in ways that are designed to drag the audience further in. I just wondered what your thoughts are on that. If you wanted to add anything or just tell me a little bit about what the term immersive in terms of performance means to you. And please, folks, if you're watching, feel free to put your comments in the chat. Go ahead, DJ.
Katie, hi. So I really like the word, pardon me, I love the word immersive, and I like thinking about what it means, because I'm definitely not going to offer some final definition here. I think the word gets overused a lot. I've seen it used to refer to like the tasting notes for a beer. So I think that just finding our way through immersive and the idea of immersive. I like the description you offer. I feel like there's also a sort of visual and physical and spatial element. Like I am going to be completely surrounded by a fictional experience. I've been to theater where I can look all around and see actors all around me, but I can also see lights and I can see other audience members, and we just sit in a chair. And that's great theater, or can be, but I don't think of that as exactly immersive. I feel like immersive is going to completely include me in a theatrical world, maybe even completely enclose that world.
So in other
I don't know
words,
what the other panelists might think.
Actually, I've done some theater, and in regards to like to do Midsummer Night Dream outside is totally different. And so we did it in the woods. So you had the sounds and the smells, and and the audience actually goes further into that play more because of what the nature of the play is to begin with. So I think if you were to do something like Alice in Wonderland and you provide tea to your audience for the tea party, now you're actually the scent and the smell and the taste of the tea. Those experiences are part of the immersion.
so it sounds like there can be degrees of immersion as
I would
well.
So, I mean,
Yeah.
like he's saying, it's such a broad term. So we almost need to, as a theater, use it as many ways as we can. But then when we say this, we probably should be more clear about what we actually mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's going to vary too. How about you, Amy? Any thoughts about what makes a production or an experience immersive?
You know, I was thinking about that when you broached this subject in terms of what productions I have been in that would qualify as immersive. And yeah, I like the last speaker's comments in terms of the degree of immersion can be quite different. I mean, I think the theatrical experience itself is already more immersive than if I'm like in a movie theater just watching a film, because you're already having the interaction of the audience and what's going on stage. It plays a lot different without an audience, obviously, as we all saw during the pandemic. But yeah, I mean, I think the audience itself can be part of it just in terms of the actual experience, and it can be heightened, by what additional elements we bring, or like you were saying, the audience can be actually one of the actors in it, and that they can be involved. And I think that's a great opportunity that we have all these different levels depending on the situation and the funds and all the logistics of the production.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you for that, Amy. I think I would have to argue a bit that there can be, so what I'm hearing, what I will argue, but what I'm hearing is that there can be immersive elements that are part of a traditional theatrical presentation that bring a sensory or that drags the audience further in. But then if you can also have an immersive experience in the sense of, if the audience member is not there and participating, that the experience can't happen, possibly as well. It's like you could do Midsummer Night's Dream to an empty house and it would still be the play that it is, although why you would do that, I don't know. But maybe what the opportunity that immersive theater adds is a story that not only envelops the audience member, but relies on them as part of the storytelling? Question mark?
I think that Katie, you mentioned the word participatory. And I think that there's all kinds of performances that might surround an audience, but I think one of the things that's increasingly characteristic of what we call immersive theater in 2022 is a degree of participation. I wonder if the panelists might comment on their perspectives on what the audience is asked to do in immersive theater, because it's usually more than just sit and watch, which is not a bad thing. I've had a lot of satisfactory theater experiences just sitting in a chair, but usually that's not characteristic of immersive theater today. Correct. So I wonder what my panelist, Laura, in particular, might have to say about the role of participation in immersive experience.
So I think participation is really central to immersive theater. I would agree that I think involving the audience in interesting ways is a hallmark of this particular form. In my own practice, I'm really interested in, though, trying to move beyond sort of the idea that in a proscenium show, the people are not participating. And it's the people on stage who are doing all of the work. Whereas in an immersive show, you are participating and having the experience. I worry that the word kind of experience now, which you said is, has been extended to like the beer commercial, but also to, luxury vacations and things like that, that it also cheapens all the kinds of theater that would happen in a traditional theater space, which I also feel is participatory and has an experience too. I think the question is that there is more of an intentionality in thinking about what that experience is and about the ways in which the audience is invested. And I think that can happen in a traditional proscenium setup, and it can also happen in a show like Sleep No More, where you're in a much more intense way running after a character and trying to follow them. In the work that I've been doing recently, I've been kind of asking the question about what it means to cast audience members as active witnesses in the work that they're following, or the story that they're following. And then asking myself the question, do they always need to be doing something in the sense that like, oh, now the actor is talking to me. Now the actor is wanting me to sit down and play Duck, Duck, Goose with them. Now the actor is pulling me into a room and giving me a one-on-one. Does it always have to be that? Or is there also a way in an immersive show to think about participation as a way of asking people to think about the condition of watching, but doing so differently? I don't know if that makes sense.
I think it does make sense, Laura. Thank you. And it actually speaks to a comment that one of our viewers made, which they say, one of the things I appreciate about immersive work is the greater amount of choice I have as an audience member, which is a little bit different than you're saying about witnessing, which has to do, I think, with like being culpable or being like part of what's happening and not separate from it. But the choice part also adds to that agency and level of like, necessity that the audience member has to the production, maybe in a similar way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's beautiful about the comment is that like immersive theater is exciting because it activates the possibility of there being a choice, whatever that choice is, right? I mean, there always is that choice in proscenium too, but immersive theater is often more intentional about it. So sometimes people are like, oh, why in that show, did you make the choice to stand back and watch those actors as opposed to being the person who danced with them? Like what's exciting about the use of space and the staging of story in these contexts is that everybody is negotiating their role in a slightly different way, whether it's their role as a character within the narrative or their role as audience members in relation to other audience members. Just making that matrix of choice visible, I think is really exciting and politically interesting too.
I think part of it is also the audience and which audience you bring along. If you bring a traditional audience to an immersive theater who isn't ready to interact, that can be difficult. And then I think, so us as a director or producer or actor has to be willing to give up control to play along with what we don't know. And that actually is really exciting, but at the same time can be scary at times also. Because the ad libs and the stuff coming from someone who's actually doesn't know the lines or doesn't have lines, and which is, can I play off this and how do I go take that further now? And I think that's where a full immersion happens once we let go of some of that control.
You're picking up on something that I think is also specific to immersive, well, more amplified in immersive theater, which is the level of visceral or bodily like experience that an audience might have in comparison to a more traditional theatrical event.
And
whereas just for one moment, let me finish my sentence, but let's say that nervousness, that anxiety, or that excitement that comes from being suddenly on the spot and involved, the heart rate rises, blood pressure is changed, your pheromones getting off, or the experience might be engaging your sight, your taste, your touch, and smell in a heightened way that like makes your body, not just your mind or part of the whole organism. Go ahead, Brian.
And I was going to say, I think this is where I think it is important to be maybe not in a proscenium theater, but you use a bar or a bowling alley, or you take the play to as close as place to where it's supposed to take place. And I think you actually, when you do that, you change you find a more appropriate audience probably also.
Can we talk about space, y'all? So Jason Warren says like part one, the audience and how they interact. Part two, the space itself. Exciting. Amy, do you want to tell us a little bit about the space you were in the projects that you were an actor in, and anything else, of course, you want to add about being a performer in that kind of realm?
Space is a big impact, I think, in terms of how people are perceiving and the whole experience. With the show that we did together with Turnkey and Tuyo Theater, we did 2 rounds, and the first time we were in an inside facility that was broken down into 6 different rooms that the audience moved through, and in each room constituted a different scene. And then the second time around, it was part of a Without Walls festival where we were actually outdoors, although we still had set rooms. It was definitely more of the Without Walls approach. So, and I agree. I mean, I think you take something outside of the traditional four walls of the theater, and in itself is a much different experience. In terms of challenges, it can be once you remove the walls. There's a lot of different elements in terms of sound. Sometimes it's just a matter of mobility as well, so that adds additional things to think about in terms of the production range. But yeah, from the performance end, it's very exciting.
Thanks, Amy. And I would add to that the time period of this of that experience was 1940s. And so we had to do everything that we could to transform built spaces. I mean, these are like tents and wooden walls and, kind of traditional theatrical sets in that sense, and that they were spaces constructed for a play. But they enveloped the audience in that you entered a room and you're not sitting in an auditorium, you're in the performance space, and all of the props, photos, textures, sounds are period specific. You're trying to hide the theatricality, the little instruments that you're using, and let people believe that everything that they're seeing or that is in the space is of that world. It's like entering a different time and place as completely as possible. Whether we're 100% successful, and maybe there was an anachronistic image or object here and there, the attempt was, and I know this is common in many immersive experiences, the attempt was to allow the audience to step from being outside and go inside the space and be in a whole different freestanding world, while not feeling like you're in a quote theater. Sure, if anyone has anything else to add about space and how it works in general or in this form. Some examples you've experienced.
So I'm doing, I've worked on a couple of different immersive shows, but the one I'm developing right now, because it's not done, is in a VR context. So we're staging a play that was originally actually staged in a proscenium theater in VR chat, which is within VR chat, we've created our own world, which is sort of like a mini replica of downtown Toronto. And we're bringing, it's a piece that's about the G20 protests in Toronto in 2010, which was the largest mass arrest in Canadian history. In that case of protesters who were kettled and locked up. And we're trying to reconstruct or reenact some of those events by taking people through different parts of the city. And when DJ came to a very early showing of the work, he made an observation that I found really helpful, which was that it felt, even though it's like an immersive show in VR, it felt like a site-specific show in a way, because there was an opportunity, even though they weren't the real sites, to experience sort of different elements. And I think what's interesting, I think that's true. But I think what's also interesting about immersive is that there is a sort of an opportunity for people to traverse space in a different way. That you're not like as you were just talking about playing with inside and outside spaces. That's something we do in the show as well. But even just the feeling of moving through space, like the possibilities of kind of peripatetic theater, where your heartbeat gets raised through like having to follow someone quickly or having to move your body in a way through space in order to follow a particular story, that it creates a different kind of layer of understanding of what someone is talking about, to actually be physically present in that particular site. So beyond the sites and beyond the actual being able to locate yourself and immerse yourself in the environment that someone's talking about, just the experience of moving through space, I think, is something unique and has kind of interesting dramaturgical possibilities for creating suspense, for creating empathy in relation to a particular narrative. I don't know. And then depending on what the environment is, there are different possibilities. I mean, in our environment, you can jump up and go to the top of the CN Tower, which you can't do in most immersive theater, like in kind of live in person. But I don't know, DJ, if you want to speak to that, as I know you love space just as much as I do.
I do. I love talking about space. So Katie, when you ask about space, I'm like, I don't know quite where to begin.
Yeah.
And Laura, I think, mentioned Sleep No More. So Sleep
Which
No More has become,
we love together in a similar way.
We have never attended, Laura and I have never attended Sleep No More at the same time, but we've both talked about it and written about it. And for our audience members here on YouTube, Sleep No More is an immersive dance theater adaptation of Shakespeare's Macbeth that has become, as many of you probably already know, the iconic example of immersive theater. And it's certainly not the only way to do immersive theater, but it's recognizable to many. And I think a lot about space experiences in immersive theater with reference to my experiences in Sleep No More. But Brian mentioned a production of Midsummer that was set in a forest, and Laura's talking about this virtual reality adaptation of a proscenium play. But really, in many ways, Laura, You Should Have Stayed Home is like site-specific theater in virtual reality, because it recreates downtown Toronto and then takes you through a big part of downtown Toronto. You don't have to actually walk it. You're navigating your way through it in the gadget. So there is this really interesting doubling of space, in that I'm exploring a space that I'm not really exploring, which is both like immersive theater and different from immersive theater, where I really am exploring a space. And it has, immersive theater and site-specific theater have commonalities as well as differences. So I think it's interesting that Laura and Brian have both talked about the immersive elements of choosing a specific site for that site. And in the case of You Should Have Stayed Home, creating a site in order to help tell a story about that site. Yes, and being able to fly to the top of CN Tower is something that the average tourist is not able to actually do.
Wouldn't you say, DJ, though, that there's also a doubling of space in something like, and I'm just trying to make connections between something like staging Shakespeare in Sleep No More, in that environment, and the VR environment, that there's a doubling of space in a way in that environment too, because like in VR, where you have to reconstruct a city, you're not actually walking around a city. It's a fake thing. And there are moments in our show where, you're in a bus, but then the bus disappears and you're flying on top of a bunch of prison cells. That in a lot of immersive theater shows, there is a poetic element to the way that space is created and sculpted.
And that's certainly the case in Sleep No More.
Yeah.
Where you go from the Macbeth's bedroom up a flight of stairs, and now you're in, a Scottish high street. So I'm simultaneously aware of the fakery of this. I'm not really in Scotland.
No.
But I'm also in this actual space. This is real space. It's not real as in Scotland, but it's here, and I'm going through a drawer and I'm finding things about fictional characters. And I'm having an embodied experience that depends on navigational participation, in that I choose where I go, whether I run down the hall after that character or stay here going through a filing cabinet filled with fake fictional records.
Can I jump in?
I like the idea of doubled spaces. Katie.
We have a question I think is a great question. What's the difference between site-specific and immersive performance? I could speak to that unless someone else would prefer to do that. These are cousins. These are very close cousins. Go ahead, DJ.
Oh, no, I was going to say I
Oh.
teach a 15-week course on that. So I don't know how to answer the question without like 3 months. So maybe you should take the question, Katie.
I'm going to give the 100 level answer. So very simply put, of course, as we're talking about, like, we're half an hour in and we're still kind of talking about what is immersive theater and like, what does space mean. So clearly this is a complicated subject, but very, easily put, site-specific theater is a play or performance piece that takes place in a space that is outside of a traditional theater and is meant to be in conversation with that space somehow. So let's say Brian mentioned earlier the production of A Midsummer Night's Dream placed in an actual forest. So the trees, the grass, the animals inhabiting that forest, and the way the play is performed is now staged specifically to accommodate and to comment and to interact with the space that it's in. I think site-specific theater can be immersive, but immersive theater doesn't have to be site-specific. So it's like an existing space that is used or that in which is placed a narrative of some kind. Sometimes that narrative exists already, like Midsummer Night's Dream. Sometimes people go to a space and they learn about its history and they see its architecture, and they analyze the energy of the space and they create a piece for that space that exists because of that space. Immersive theater can happen in a warehouse that's then built into an enclosed, an enveloping set. It can be in an existing site, but then engages the audience member through choice or sensory engagement or movement or involving them directly in the narrative. So there's a degree of audience participation and envelopment in the story that is essential in immersive theater that can be put aside in site-specific. So you could have in your site-specific space the audience completely separate from the performance and they're never involved except through watching, for example. I'm not sure, Alex, if that's clear. If it's not, please ask more questions and we can try and answer either in the chat later or verbally now.
Can I play devil's advocate here for a second?
Sure.
So is an escape room an immersive theater? I mean, you pay money, you pay a fee, you sign up, and you become the actors to escape that setting without actual actors even sometimes. So I'm thinking about this myself and the possibilities of where this can go further, and I'm like a play with geocaching, and now I got tags, and I got to get to these places within 15 minutes of my next thing to figure out my clues and interact with some actors to finish the play. And that sounds like amazing and fun. So I see so much more possibilities. A scavenger hunt within a play is great, I think.
Mhm.
Yeah. I often ask my students, like, what about an escape room? Or what about these things that tend to pop up in, sorry, let me start over. What about these examples of immersive art exhibits, like the immersive Van Gogh exhibits that have been traveling around the United States? How is this different from Sleep No More or an escape room or a site-specific piece? I think there's, to go back to something you said earlier, Katie, there's a continuum. And, in previous decades, when the conversation in scholarly circles revolved around the expression environmental theater, not about like an ecological subject matter, but rather thinking about physical space as a continuum of including or separating performers and audience in the same area. So I think that the conversation we're having today is in many ways tracing the contours of this historical conversation about the relationship between audience space and performance space, which really goes back decades, well into the 20th century, and you can trace a long history back, at least in European theater contexts, back hundreds of years.
And
which is all a way of saying to Brian, maybe?
No, you're
my
I love it. I don't know.
my response would be yes. And I get like a little bit annoyed with like immersive theater is this special thing over here, and it's different than this thing, and it's different than this thing.
Yes.
Let's just let it all be in conversation fluidly and wonderfully with one another, and problematically, when it's used to sell the beer and all the things. I just wanted to tack on to what you're saying too, DJ, is not only is there this kind of long history, but it's also something that's like that has always been in conversation with popular culture. So the escape room is absolutely related to theater in the same way that Punch Drunk, that produces, these incredible immersive experiences like Sleep No More, is borrowing from video games. So, and the sort of, they are, and the sort of-
Did you say born from?
Borrowing from.
Yep.
Borrowing from the logic of the video game, where you go into a video game environment. It's like an open sandbox world, and that there are characters that you have to follow. And when you bump into a particular character, you have a particular kind of conversation, which can lead to potentially the ground opening up and you going into another space where you get to meet someone else. It's video game logic. And they're super aware of that. So I think these things are always in conversation. Like theater is not like some, special art that's not in dialogue with the other things that are going on in our culture. And escape rooms are happening and being developed tandem with the immersive form.
Well, I'm quite comfortable with the convoluted. I think there is
exactly.
You have to this is immersive and this is not. The audience member defines what was immersive to them.
Totally.
Yeah, I like putting the emphasis on audience experience and thinking about the ways in which the experience sort of draws out different ways of being an audience member in different contexts.
And that actually might speak to the question that the second question Alex is posing, which is, what are the requirements for an experience to be considered immersive theater rather than just an immersive art exposition or something like that? And Kay is offering something in response to that. But it's basically what you're saying, which is to some extent or to an important extent, the audience experience and their level of engagement, however that engagement is defined in that particular piece. It is, as we've just been saying, so hard to just narrow down. Checkbox, this is immersive, because it really is about the story at the heart of the experience, how the audience is involved, how separated they are, how close they are to the action, the space is taking place in, and how that's curated. So it, to me, is what's exciting about this form, is that it offers us the opportunity to stretch our imaginations to the limit of what performance is and where the boundaries are between real life and performance. And through that, perhaps opening up possibilities for empathy, creating shared experiences that you then internalize as something you've done. That's now part of your experience, whether it was fictional or not. Which reminds me of the actual practice of immersive theater and being in a performance, which we're fortunate to have Amy with us, who has, and myself in that same experience when I filled in as an understudy one night, being an actor in that form where you have an acting colleague who is an audience member you've never met before or rehearsed with. Right. Amy, do you mind speaking to what do you think is the biggest difference between being an actor in an immersive situation like that, where you are directly interacting with the audience member, and a traditional piece, or what is exciting or challenging about it, whatever of that you'd like to speak to from your experience?
Yeah, and I would echo back what the other participants were saying as well. I think immersive theater really has a strong opportunity to provide theatrical experiences to people who I think wouldn't necessarily go into a traditional theater. I can think of a couple of recent projects I've been in that, I'm guessing a good percentage of the people had never or rarely, step into a traditional theater, but the opportunity for that to be there, I think, is really strong. In terms of for the performance end, I think especially if it's more of an improv show, a challenge sometimes is figuring out how much participation the audience members want to be as participants in the show. And sometimes it's clear, people, through their body language or whatnot. It's like, no, I want to observe. I don't really want to play an active role. But then in other ones, it's very hard to tell. I acted recently in an activation as part of the Comic-Con. And there, I found sometimes it was really easy to draw people into the experience. And other times I wasn't sure how much people wanted to be involved. But then when I went and approached them and drew them into the character, drew them into the actual show, they were very excited and really, sometimes they were the most actively participating. So that can be a challenge. I think another challenge as well is in the show that we did with On Her Shoulders, I played character, but that was not so likable. She had a lot of racist views, and I did definitely feel that was more of a challenge. I played villains before on more traditional theaters, and somehow there was a way maybe to more disconnect on a stage. That's harder to do when people are right next to you. There were points in times where I would not want to say what I was going to say because I could feel the vibes, and I knew how people were going to react once I said it right after that. So I think I mean, that's obviously it's a challenge, but it's also a good thing as well, since it brings home to me as an actor, the power of words and our actions.
Yeah, you're absolutely speaking to a degree of vulnerability that is always present when you're a live performer, but which is intensified when someone is 3 feet from you and could touch you, you don't know because they don't know what you're going to do. They don't know how they're going to respond. Clearly, most people are not so outgoing that they're going to violate physical space unless it's been part of the instructions or something like that. But I could see how when you're putting out, especially controversial performance that might have an emotional response from folks, you may have been feeling like, I don't know what's going to happen here. And that's a different degree of uneasiness. I appreciate you sharing that, Amy. I had a similar experience where you have to also adjust your plans based on the bodies in the room. When I filled in, it was for the first room, which asked people to simulate a air raid drill, and they need to get down and get underneath things. And my first group was a set of older folks that were not going to get down on the floor. They were not going to get down on the floor, and my job was to get them down on the floor. And so I had to figure in the moment, I'm figuring out how to still keep them engaged while not making them endanger themselves or cause us a liability issue. And whereas other people were just I'm not doing it. And so in character, you just figure it out. But it is, I think, exciting for that, but also a little anxiety ridden.
The other thing I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Amy.
Go ahead.
I think the other exciting thing to see, in the interactive, and again, I'm thinking back onto the On Her Shoulders, was seeing the participants actively participating with other participants. At one point, sometimes they would write notes on some of the props in the room, and then the next set of participants would read those notes, and I could see them, drawing from the experiences of the other participants. So that was kind of a neat angle as well.
As an audience member, not a maker, I do feel a sense in most immersive experiences that I'm actively participating. I'm not a performer, but I am. My participation is collaborative in making things happen, and I try to be a good co-performer or a good audience participant, as one scholar calls immersive theater audiences. And I try not to overstep my boundaries, literal or figurative. But I think performers can figure out that I'm an experienced audience member. I've told my students things that have happened to me in immersive theater performances like Sleep No More. And most of my students are not experienced theater goers. And after telling about one particularly, for me, exciting experience at Sleep No More, there was a long silence in my classroom, and one of the students from the back of the room said, "Yeah, no," which, if you're not from California, means 100% negative response. Absolutely not. They would not have been up for the way I cooperated in letting a performer grab me by the head and move me around a room, basically in the dark. Which to me was like, hey, this is very immersive. And to my students, that would have been like, how do I call 911 from here? So I think that speaks to the audience side of the kind of experience from a performer that you're talking about. You never know what an audience member is going to be choosing to do. And as an audience member, I mean, I don't determine the outcome of something like Sleep No More. There are immersive experiences in VR and IRL where a participant can have some degree of influence over how the events turn out. There's no spoiler. Macbeth's going to die. But I do have some control over where I go and how much can happen to me under certain circumstances. And I think perhaps, Amy, you can identify audience members, and Katie too, audience members who are trepidatious and are going to stay back and might not even want to get down on the floor with you, or perhaps might not be able to get down on the floor with you. And audience members who are going to be game for whatever you ask them to do.
Well, I think part of it is the level of trust between you and the actor is a lot of it. And then going back to their part, which is the collaborative side of that, be it an audience member or the partners you bring in to help market your show. I think the collaboration thing is on so many different levels in that regard.
Absolutely. Oh, sorry, Laura, go ahead.
Oh, no. I mean, I was just going to add that just like in some of this conversation, we're talking about the level of trust between the actors and the performers. We're talking about physical boundaries that people become aware of and have different sensitivities in certain ways. Issues of access, for example, Katie, when you're saying that you're making a bunch of elderly people get down on the ground, and raises the question about, does immersive theater think about access and politics, the politics of embodied sense of comfort and safety enough, which is some of my work has addressed. And it's complicated because, I too, like DJ, am the person who likes to have my face like grabbed and to be led around the room. But I also know performers, let's just switch this, in Sleep No More, in other shows like Third Rail projects in New York, who have been violated by audience members, women in particular, because they see the invitation to participate and to participate fully as an invitation to access gendered bodies in particular ways. So I just that there's some interesting politics around this question too of what the audience member feels permission to do, and what the larger conditions are around that.
And I want to add here the word that Brian introduced, trust. As an audience member, I feel pretty comfortable in some circumstances. I have been in an immersive experience, not Sleep No More, but another, where things are going great, and then I'm in a moment where I really don't feel safe. And so I try to control the situation. And then to return to Laura's point, it's incumbent upon immersive producers to ensure the safety of their performers so that they can trust that they will be safe, because they are making themselves quite vulnerable, especially in some of the most intimate encounters in something like Sleep No More. It's a real challenge.
What I'm hearing is that immersive experiences that are trying to be as immersive as possible. taking into account that there are some that are more so and some that are less, amplifies the politics and possibilities that are already present in traditional theater, but kind of like makes them more intense. So when Laura's talking about politics and issues of access to gender identity, racial identity, and how bodies interact, what people feel is possible for them, what they have permission to do, where they feel safe or not safe, those are always present in live performance. But when you are eliminating boundaries between the audience and the performance itself, they become things that we have to think about even more, and that we have to understand how they may or may not be operating in our space. So as theater makers or makers of this form, you have an even greater responsibility to your audience. I'd argue you always have a responsibility to your audience. Not all theater makers acknowledge that or take full responsibility for that. But we have to really ask ourselves, why are we asking our audiences to do this? What is it going to leave them? What are we trying to have as a walk away from this? Not just like, oh, that was a really cool effect when everybody got splattered with blood. Wasn't that fun? Why would you do that to someone? And what are you hoping is the outcome? So we can't just be arbitrary. Well, we should avoid making arbitrary decisions for the sake of spectacle, unless I guess that's the point of your whole experience. But put that out there. I knew we would have no trouble filling this time period with these people so passionate about what they do. But I do want to be respectful of my panelists' time and of our audience's time. And I think bring our conversation to a close here. There are so many more questions to ask, so many more answers to the questions we've already discussed. And this has been a really great conversation. I'm trying to think of the best way to close us out here. I'd love to hear once more from each of our panelists. Perhaps if you can briefly answer this with this question, which would be, what excites you the most about the possibilities of immersive performance? Beyond what it is and the details, what is it that you think it offers to folks and why we do it? It's a kind of a complex question, but do your best. I'll let you think about that for a second. For myself, while y'all are pondering, I'll go ahead and offer just that I like the sense of empowering my audience. I'm a big improvisational actor myself and find that it's the easiest way to be in the moment when I don't have a plan. So I like that it shakes people up and makes them get out of their comfort zone, which makes you think more, in my opinion, think and feel more. I don't know if anyone wants to add to that. Someone is asking in the chat if there's going to be a part 2 to this. Yes, we will come back in the future with more. Go ahead, Brian.
I would definitely. I think the idea of challenging my audience to push back and give back. I think there in a traditional theater, I can feel the audience when they're with me as an actor, and so I think when I'm only 3 feet away, when the audience is with you as a whole that close, you can the give and take of the energy and chemistry can be even more intense, and you can take that feeling and intensity even further.
Excellent, thank you. Amy, sorry, Laura, you go ahead.
No, I can't. I'm a space person, so I think the thing I love the most is like the possibility to explore an environment as fully as possible, and the element of surprise when you find something in a space that you didn't know would be there, or that you didn't know could be used in a certain way. There's something incredibly magical about that, and the kind of element of kind of discovery in relation to environment, and how many different like how multifaceted and layered an environment can be, and how theatrical that is. That's what I love about immersive.
I cannot agree with you more. I totally agree. I'm the person who always gets in trouble in museums for like getting too close to the art.
Me too. It's like, is there something behind that, or what's behind this door, right? And just the incredible storytelling possibilities of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Getting beyond dialogue and engaging physical.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it provides such a wonderful opportunity both for the audience and I think for, you know, the performers in a show to really embrace the story, to embrace the people, to embrace what people are feeling. I think someone had brought up empathy, and I think that the more that you bring in the sounds, the smells, the closeness, the movements, that really helps you understand what someone's going through a lot better.
No, I love what everybody has said here. I don't know that I have anything that supersedes what others. There's a lot of agreement. One of the things that I love most about immersive experiences is actually coming with a plan. And sometimes that plan doesn't happen, but when it does, when I get taken behind a closed door, that's a pretty amazing experience in itself. And that's something that I feel is distinctive about a lot of immersive theater.
What I'm hearing is kind of what excites us all about theater in general, but then like maximized by the immersive possibilities of the immersive form. And I can't wait to talk to you all about this again, I hope sometime in the future. And for our folks who joined us today, no matter your degree of experience with this form, if you're at all curious about it, please keep exploring it, keep going to immersive experiences, contact us with ideas about your own if you don't already have folks that are helping you produce it. We want to make more of this art in the world that is active and involves people and their ideas and variables and the unknown. Okay, I'm going to stop now, but thank you all again, Brian, DJ, Laura, Amy, for your time today. Thank you to everyone who's out there in the online space. Please let us know who you are and talk to us more. And we look forward to bringing you more about immersive theater in the future. Happy Friday. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.